Welcome to Professor Game Podcast, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who brings the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I teach and work at IE Business School in Madrid, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Want to know more? Go to professorgame.com/subscribe, start on our email list, and ask me anything. Welcome again, Engagers. Today we have somebody quite special, and you probably have read one of his books, heard of his work. There's many things that we will be talking about, but before we get started, Professor Sheldon, are you prepared to engage?
Yes.
Let's do this, because Professor Lee Sheldon is a game writer and designer. He's a professor of practice in interactive media and game development at Worcester Polytechnic Institute, and he's also the author of the Multiplayer Classroom Designing Coursework as a Game, the Multiplayer Classroom Game Plans and Character Development and Storytelling for Games. His recent games feature The Lion's Song, Suburbia, Disney Fantasia in Spanish, Music Evolved, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, which is for Xbox. His classes are designed as games, are the Janus Door, a cybersecurity class for Cal Poly, Secrets, a cyber culture mystery game, and an online class for Excelsior College, and Crimson Dilemma, a business ethics video game for Indiana University. He has spearheaded the development of the first writing for games full concentration at the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute and the second at Worcester Polytechnic Institute. And he is currently consulting on a NASA-funded game for science museums and planetariums involving the exploration of the moon. In a former life, he was a TV writer and producer with over 200 produced scripts from Charlie's Angels to Star Trek, The Next Generation. Wow. So many things that we could be talking about, Professor Sheldon, but is there anything that I'm missing from that intro?
No, I think that's pretty good. I've been around for a while, so it can get kind of long. I apologize for that.
But it's awesome to get to know you a little bit more through these quick intros. And beyond what we talked about, maybe sometimes the people in the show like to understand, what does a regular day feel like to be with you? Like if we were Professor Sheldon today or tomorrow or this week, what would it feel like? What are the kinds of things that you're doing day to day?
Well, it depends on the day. Worcester is a long commute where I teach from where I live, so I don't go in every day. So on the days I do go in, I have teaching, strangely enough, committees, advising, grading, and all the other things that go along with teaching. On the days that I'm home, I'm writing 3 books and consulting on the NASA grant, what you mentioned in the intro. So I'm pretty much involved with game-based learning and games and everything surrounding them all days of the week, even on weekends, because on weekends is really when I get a lot of my writing done.
Wow. So it's a lot of games and that kind of jazz in your life. So that's very exciting.
I actually get to play games occasionally too.
Oh, there you go. Draw some inspiration. That's research.
Yes.
So we would like to dive into a story, Professor Sheldon. And that story has to do with, and I'm sure as a game designer as well, you're very familiar with the concept of failure or fail. First attempt in learning. So we would like to know of a story of a time, again, you set out to do this game or some sort of thing, maybe for the classroom or a game for some other professor as well. And, at least initially, things did certainly not go your way or something didn't go the way you expected. And what, of course, you learned from that experience, what would you maybe do different in a future experience that is similar? We want to be there with you and learn some of your lessons.
Well, how much time do you have just for this one question? I've had multiple failures. I think in designing games, one of the hardest series of games that I had to design were based on Agatha Christie novels. And Agatha Christie is not known for having action-packed stories. There's a body on the hearthrug and a bunch of people standing around waiting to be interviewed, and that's about it. And it took me quite a while to figure out how to adapt them and keep the feeling, the Agatha Christie feeling, or else people would have screamed at me, but still add things to do. I mean, when we speak of action in my writing class, we don't just speak of car chases or spaceship chases or something like that. There's internal action, and there's action between people. A battle of wits can be as compelling in a game as a battle on a battlefield. So it took me quite a while, particularly on the first one, to figure that out. But as I went along, I ended up designing 4, of which only 3 were released. The 4th one, of course, was the best. And by the time I got there, I was very comfortable in keeping the spirit of the books, but still being able to turn them into something that people might actually want to play. A couple of others, just shortly. I'm sorry I didn't move past gamification sooner. Gamification, and this is going to come up again, is not my favorite thing. And I'll get into why and so on. But I spent too much time with extrinsic rewards and not enough time with intrinsic rewards, and not enough time with what it is I do well. And that leads me to my last, I guess, favorite failure, which is I didn't recognize the importance of narrative. Here I am, a professional writer, and you think I would have been able when I started to teach, which wasn't, I mean, it was like, 14 years ago, I think. But no, I kind of understood what games were, and I was designing them, and I was even putting narrative into the commercial games. But the first few the classes that I designed had no narrative in them. I was just using what people would call gamification, and I knew I wasn't getting the whole experience. But once I recognized that narrative is not just like some people call it a bunch of assignments turned into quests, but a narrative story should be every bit as engaging as any commercial game or other media. And once I got there and I had done enough of the others, I could find a way to bring that level of narrative into teaching.
That's exciting. That's exciting for sure. Just for clarification, because we get all sorts of guests, people who are more into gamification, more into game-based learning, more into serious games. I mean, the definitions are all over the place in a way. So what would you say is gamification? I know you mentioned it's the short-term or the extrinsic rewards. And besides, of course, only extrinsic rewards is clearly something we don't want to be designing only for, definitely. But is that the thing the way that you would define gamification, and is that the only thing you don't like about it?
No, I think gamification is first of all a nasty word, and I'm also saying that as a writer. It's just an ugly word. But beyond that, gamification is, I don't know. I think we lose sight of what is important in a game sometimes. And what I see in gamification, even if people are not just going for extrinsic rewards, but when I said before, when they talk about narrative, they talk about, we have quests. Well, having quests isn't really getting a structured narrative, and you can't do all those things that you can do in a narrative unless those quests are tied together with some overall theme. I don't like to read books that don't have themes. I don't like to play games that don't have themes. And I certainly want the games that I create in the classroom to have themes that are ongoing over the entire course of, whether it's a quarter, a semester, a year. And so I think that cohesiveness is often missing. From what I see, people are trying. Yes, they know that what an intrinsic reward is now. Gamification used to be only extrinsic, right?
Yeah.
But they don't necessarily understand that an intrinsic reward that's standing alone there, like an oasis in a desert, is not that much better than gamification, just, piling on all the numbers and rewards.
Yeah, just piling up points, badges, and leaderboards is never going to cut it, for sure.
Yeah, but that's extrinsic, but intrinsic also can't be just sort of
isolated.
Intrinsic now, yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. And within that definition of what we see, what you see as gamification, I have to completely agree that doesn't work. I think both the field of gamification and game design itself are some evolving, some maybe not so much. But they're still pretty young, and I think that there's many things to learn, even from, especially gamification from game design itself, can learn so much. and I think it's the main inspiration. And I'm pretty sure that there's a lot of people doing not so good things in that field, which leads people like you who are doing great work to see gamification that way. So I completely agree with your dissertation, so to speak.
Well, I agree with you that I'm doing great work. I would caution you against using the word young, because people have been teaching with games. This is one of the things that I bring up in my talk. People have been teaching with games since the Egyptians, ancient Egyptians, and John Locke, the philosopher of the 17th century, talks specifically about how to turn a lesson into a game. So video games also call themselves young to explain why we don't have Hamlet yet, as you know, our Hamlet, and or even Citizen Kane. The movie industry had the first narrative film in the movie industry was called The Great Train Robbery. And its big moment was when one of the outlaws pointed a gun at the camera and shot it, and people in the audience screamed and fainted and everything, and it was wonderful. But between that and Birth of a Nation, which is a reprehensible movie in so many ways, but it has so many new things in it, and it's a first movie that is considered art in a way, and how it was put together was only 12 years. And during that 12 years, there was a huge amount of technical change. I hear from people, that it's young because we've got all this technical change. Well, the storytelling now doesn't depend on technical change. You can tell a story with a blue dot and a pink dot. And so I think that young is another. I don't want us looking for reasons why. And we've had this kind of gamification and everything now for a couple of decades.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like
the specific
stuff.
stuff.
The sales teams having points and having their incentives and having even themes for these things is definitely not a new thing in that way. All I meant is, especially in the field of researching and people dedicating themselves perhaps more deeply to researching how these things could work, how they couldn't work. And to your point as well, I agree that completely agree that there are many, 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 many failed gamification projects. There's a great deal of fantastic games, and there's a great deal of games which are not great. But again, it's part of the thing of getting things that are not well experimented through. And I don't know. I feel that there's still a lot to be said. But again, I completely agree that there's a big risk in not having a togetherness to whatever it is you're designing, because I do agree that, and completely agree that this is a design field. I mean, it's not just about having something that is like a structure you just put there and you use a cookie cutter to use it everywhere, because there's two like very similar games that some of them cut it and some of them don't. And the reason is a lot deeper than just seeing which are the mechanics, if there's a narrative or not. There's many, many elements, and I'm sure that 20 or many, many more times about that than I can talk about right now. So completely agree.
Okay, good. I will have a tendency to rattle on, so just kind of poke me or something and tell me to move on to the next topic.
Absolutely. So that's exactly what we're doing right now, because I want to actually go for a challenge, a time that, of course, you used all these abilities in game design that you have to solve a big problem or to teach a great lesson. We want to, again, getting into the narrative and into the story and into the theme, like we want to be there in that story with you and understand what were the things that you went through and how did you solve them and what would maybe a general idea of the solution look like.
Well, the one that I wanted to talk about is actually pretty simple, but it took me a while to recognize it. And that was the moment, even when I was designing my first classes as games, students, the attendance picked up quite a bit, but there were still students who weren't showing up, and then they'd get behind in both the game and the class. And if they were in a guild or something at the time, they would have a lot of people mad at them for not showing up. But I wasn't taught to be a teacher. I don't have a degree in education, and I came to it pretty late after all this other stuff. These are things that I tried to figure out on my own. What can I do about that? And how did I make the attendance work? How did I get them to come to class? Was that I started rewarding the students, and this is going to sound extrinsic, rewarding the students for coming to class with XP instead of taking XP away from them or threatening them when they didn't come to class. All of my colleagues at now 3 universities, all of them, and including the ones that are teaching games, take, I shouldn't say all of them because I don't know for sure now about some of them, but most of them will put in their syllabus, you miss 1 class, this happens. You miss 2 classes, this happens. You miss 3 classes, you fail the course. Whereas in games, we have a reward system for actually showing up. And so all I did was switch that to come to class and I will reward you because I use XP, for the points that students earn in the class. I will reward you just for coming to class because you can't learn if you're not in class. So, and it's a significant amount of XP, which my colleagues don't understand either because, they're not doing anything. Well, yes, they are. They're learning instead of going off someplace else. And so I started just at the bottom of the syllabus after all the assignments and how much XP they're going to get for every assignment. I would put attendance, and depending upon what the overall assignment was, a decent percentage of that, and that I'm not talking about maybe more than 10%, but that's can be significant over time. It can be the difference between 2 letter grades. So, and as soon as that happened, I now have almost perfect attendance, and they all come, and I didn't threaten them. I didn't do anything else. And so when I tell this to colleagues, they go, "Wow, that's really interesting," and they continue to punish people. And I remember EverQuest, you could lose a level you had gained if you died at the wrong time, right? You could lose a level, and that was a terrible thing to have happen. And none of the MMOs do it now, but they did it then. But here you've got a system which is more like the now leveling up that we have in games, which we level up. We don't fall back anymore. We don't take points away from them. At least I can't think of a game that I've played recently that has dared to do that. We give them points and they're rewarded for it. So it's a cool thing. And they show up. So that's one of the biggest challenges I faced. But it's the change is really simple.
It sounds simple, but I think that it's not just about changing the words. I do think that it has to do as well with the overall theme that is within the class, because you're not just saying, I'm not going to, instead of, taking away points, I'm going to add you points when you come. You're also saying, directly or indirectly, those points make sense because that way you will be able to, learn or do whatever is being done in the game. And that's what that helps make it interesting as well. I think it's...
Well, they also recognize what it is.
Exactly.
Because now, everybody plays a game of some kind, and of course, I get students who come to a game program to learn how to do it. So it's a very recognizable thing for them.
They probably know a thing or two.
Yeah, they do. But also the students, the class I have now, I've got 18 students in it, and probably it's a writing class, writing for games, but I probably have half of them who are not in the game program, and then some of them are not even in the arts and sciences writing program. They are mechanical engineers and so on. So they all still come in with a certain knowledge now that I'm not sure, students had several decades ago, and it wouldn't occur to them or to the teacher to actually do it that way. But now it's like an automatic. So they go, "Oh, cool," and
straight off the bat.
and that's the intrinsic.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've been talking about, again, both success and failure. And I'm sure that with all this experience that you've had, both as a game designer and as a professor as well, you have some sort of way of doing the things that you do. So again, I don't know if that looks like a process. I don't know if that looks like a series of steps. I don't know if it's just a way of thinking through things. But I'd like to know, when you're facing one of these challenges or you're designing a new class, again, is there a series of steps, process, way of thinking? How do you approach it?
Yeah, there is. There's a definite process, but I've got two different situations. One is if I'm the teacher, and the other one is if I'm designing the class for somebody else. But let's just go with me as the teacher. And if it's my class, I first create the syllabus for me, so I know what it is I need to teach. And if I've done it before, those steps are already done. So that's the skeleton. That's going to create the structure for the class, because I want, I design each class to build on the previous class. And each class, they gain more information, like in a game. But the first thing I do is, what do I have to teach them? Okay, and these are X, Y, and Z, what I have to teach them. So then I find a narrative framework that feels fun to me as a gamer, that I think will match what it is I need to teach. So, I'm lucky in that the games that I teach, the classes that I teach are about games, and they're about writing for games or designing games, or, I do others, but the idea is that it's not a math class. Now, right when I'm designing, and I can get to what I do when it's somebody else teaching the class in a second. But so I find a narrative framework that is interesting to them. I've done some pretty simple genre, obvious ones. And I've done, like the last one that I thought really worked well, that was sort of an Indiana Jones adventure where they were divided into teams, and these ruins had been discovered in Central America. And there's all this mystery around them and everything. And the three teams who are built from the class go in different entrances of the tunnels that they've discovered and face problems that they have to solve, and those problems relate directly to what they're being taught, and even the reading from the textbook and so on. So then I've got the narrative framework, and then I make sure that all the assignments are challenges that once they solve them, they move forward in the story of the game. And in that case, that class, it was literally, they had to get past these doors made out of huge gemstones. And also there were unexpected attacks by creatures living in the tunnels. Or not just creatures, but also pitfalls. I had a boulder of unusual size that chased them, and so on. And
sounds familiar.
Yeah. So so they have to get by those, and how do they get by them? The doors were based on. Now I'm going to get it wrong, but the doors were based on part of what they had to learn. The pitfalls and things that happened were based on another part of what they had to learn, and then they moved through it. But I also set up a situation where they were in competition with each other, the three teams, because I wanted to give, they can share information or they can withhold information from the other teams. And then I had surprises in the story along the way. There was a revolution in the country, and they had to go faster. But all of this is teaching them how to learn something. So you can see how it started out simply with the syllabus, then went to the narrative framework, and then I filled in the stuff that you would expect to find in that narrative framework, but I tied each one of the lessons to a puzzle or a situation where they had to make a decision, or there was a competition or whatever. So, and then it got very complicated, obviously, but that's the idea.
the game design in itself. Yeah. And when you design for somebody else, does that process change too much?
They become the syllabus.
Okay.
The teacher tells me what they need to teach. For example, I designed a game a class as a game for 2 sections of I think they were first year students at a university in California, and it was about cybersecurity. And so I created knowing what, and the teacher provides in this case what it is they're being taught and how, and what detail they go into and everything. And I put that into my design document. So we know exactly what's being taught, exactly when I'm messing with the students. And I'm messing with them by, in that case, there was an attacker who was attacking the university's computers, and they had to go onto the dark web to find out who was doing it and why. We created our own safe dark web so that they didn't actually go out there and get into real trouble. And then there was a whole story behind this attacker, and the university happened to be near Diablo Canyon, which is a nuclear reactor facility in California. And then they realized that was going to be under attack as well as the school. And so I kept escalating the danger, and the teacher kept escalating the difficulty in preventing cyber attacks and how you can go and find out stuff. And this is not my field, right? But we built it after I did the framework, and then I had his lessons. Then we went back and forth, and we collaborated. So he got what he needed in teaching. I had the TA, who was the real TA in the class, turned out to be an FBI agent who was brought in because of these attacks, and he gets kidnapped.
Very themed. And
he gets kidnapped at one point. He doesn't show up for class, so they have to figure out where he is and then free him with a puzzle combination. And there's all sorts of stuff. So that's kind of how it is. It's more of a backwards and forwards collaboration with the teacher, but I still do all the design. Put everything into a structure, and I do all the writing. And that was a grant from the NSF, so we had some money to spend. So we did video taunts from the hacker. We did a number of different video things, actually, and it worked so well that one of the students, who I think may have missed the first class, I can't remember, went to the professor saying, "Shouldn't we tell somebody about this? This is really, we're just students. We can't do this." And
this is really scary.
Yeah, it's really scary. And then there's this whole story that comes out, and in the end, they have to decide whether the hacker actually had good intentions.
So the ethical side of it.
Yeah. So all of that was in there, as well as encryption and all the stuff. I'd have to go back and read it again to understand what it was.
Of course.
So that's the 2 different ways.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely great. Just a quick break before we continue. Are you enjoying this podcast? If you're listening through a podcasting app, please subscribe and rate us on the app. This will be of great help to reach more engagers so we can change the world together through gamification. Professor Sheldon, what would you say? We've been talking about both the success, failure, this process. Is there some sort of best practice or something that you think any game design project that you would, again, designing for a classroom perhaps, would benefit from? Like, what do you think? Not a silver bullet, because I kind of dislike that term and what it means actually. But is there something that, considering this would definitely help, or not make it a complete success, but, be very helpful to think about?
Yeah, I think that a teacher you're talking about a teacher who's just coming upon this now and may want to try it, right?
Yes.
So first of all, to approach it with an open mind and to not leap in the deep end, but to learn a little bit in the beginning and try that, and see the reaction you get. And then that will embolden you, because it will be a positive reaction, to try a little bit more and a little bit more. I would say don't do it for a class you're going to teach in the spring, when you've only got a winter break maybe to prepare it. Treat it, and in the multiplayer classroom book, I lay this kind of all out a little bit better than I'm stuttering with now. But it basically, to take it as a learning experience. If you've never done anything with a game, that's okay. everybody around you has. So you can find out family members, students, other teachers, and get all sorts of information on what works, what doesn't work in a game, and so on. And you can try it out and test it. And if it is just something as simple as rewarding for attendance, that's enough, because you don't have to do it all at once. The thing is not to be overwhelmed. I mean, if you were to look at the second game I'm writing, the second class, the second book, the second book I'm writing has annotated game designs of the collaborations, some of the major collaborations I've done. And you could, if you read that first, you'd go, all right, I'm not doing any of this. This is too hard, and walk away. But if you just take it in increments, kind of like the way we suck people into a game by, in the beginning.
Scaffolding.
Yes, scaffolding. There's an education word. But we start out and they're hunting chickens, right? And then they go on to, eventually they get to dragons. And it's exactly the same way, a little bit at a time, and just test the waters. Don't just dive in, because I have had a couple of people friends who are also teaching games, who, one in particular I can think of, I'm not going to mention the name, who tried to just leap into it and got in way over their head. Deliberate use of a pronoun that is not giving away anything. So that's the thing that I think is the most important. It will benefit from starting simple.
Starting simple, starting small, and testing is what I hear from that.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely. And after listening to these questions, to the whole interest that we've had in this conversation, is there somebody that you would be curious to listen to? Somebody you would like to answering maybe these sorts of questions in an interview like this one in Professor Game?
Oh, I had a name, but I didn't realize that you were thinking specifically, because he doesn't really teach as a game, but he's a teacher and a game designer. And if you haven't had him, you should. Brian Moriarty.
Nope, I haven't had him.
Brian works with me at WPI, and he was a game designer. He started out at Infocom back in the days of Text Adventures, and he wrote and designed one of my favorite games, which is called Trinity. And it was I think it was the first game that made me cry at one point. And this was in a text adventure. And so, yeah, Brian, and he's articulate, and he knows. I mean, he's forgotten more stuff. This is a cliche, but he's forgotten more stuff than most people know about game design. And he's also a writer, but he's also a more of a technical guy, a programmer, and everything. So I can't get into any of the programming or anything because I don't know anything about it.
But he does, so he would probably be a fantastic guest as well.
Yeah.
And of course, aside from your books, which are absolutely fantastic, is there if you had to recommend a book to the engagers, to the audience of this podcast, what book would you recommend and why? Well,
despite the title I'm about to give you, I can think of one. It's in its second edition now. It's Gamify Your Classroom by Matthew Farber. If you haven't had Matthew on, he would be. You have?
Yeah, Matt is a relatively recent guest, but he is absolutely great. Yeah.
Okay, so his book is one of the ones that I actually thought got beyond. It was one of the first ones to get beyond the leaderboards and other extrinsic stuff, right? So, and he's very committed to getting beyond that. He might have talked about, he's got a new project about, I can't remember, human emotions, and it sounds really cool. And they had a good grant for that too, because it looks good. So that would be the book, other than my two multiplayer classroom books. One of them's coming out, the first one's coming out with a second edition, because I have to do this, because the first one ended halfway through, I think, my third class, and that was 9 years ago, something like that, when I wrote it. So all the things that I said very confidently then, not all of them hold true today. So I get a chance to actually say, here's what I think now, And here's some better examples than those first few games that just had XP and leaderboards in them, pretty much. So that's coming out, and also the book called Multiplayer Classroom Game Plans are the annotated design documents. So that, but Matthew's book, if since he wasn't allowed to mention it, of course I haven't mentioned mine, I would highly recommend.
Yeah, fantastic, and that book should probably sit right next to your books as well. So we're going to get into something a bit different, and it's what would you consider is your superpower in designing these games for the classroom?
Writing.
I kind of saw that one coming.
Writing is very easy to me. When I was the head writer of a daytime serial drama soap opera, I wrote 500 pages a month.
Wow.
So, and that was, I couldn't get sick or the show would go dark. Because in daytime TV in the U.S. there are no reruns. You just keep on going, and you go 5 days a week, and so I wrote 1 week, we shot it 1 week, and it was on the air the next week. So if I could do that.
I am from Latin America, from Venezuela, so I can definitely understand what you're talking about.
You get lots of soap operas, yeah.
Yeah. They used to be actually pretty decent. Right now I think it's not even being produced too much, but yeah, there was quite a bit.
It's one of the things that the internet has almost killed, is because now you can do it yourself for real and get into all sorts of trouble. Anyway, so writing is my superpower. I've written now, plays, movies, TV, books, games, and it comes easy to me.
Great. And talking about games, what would you say? I mean, however you want to frame this one, what would you say is your favorite game?
Jeez, can I give you a few? This will go really fast.
Sure.
Any game that attempts to touch the hearts and minds of players beyond a simple adrenaline rush. So I put Trinity in there, Ryan's game, Valiant Hearts, Prune, Never Alone, Brothers, Oxenfree, and my favorite game that I've worked on is The Lion Song. All of them deal with real human emotion in one way or another. I mean, even Prune. Do you know Prune?
Nope, I haven't played it.
Prune is, you're basically just pruning with shears this ever-growing tree with its branches going out, and you have to keep it from running into obstacles and acid and all sorts of things. But by the end, there is an actual story with no dialogue, a moving story with no dialogue or anything else, that you've helped this tree. I don't want to spoil it, but it's kind of an amazing thing how much emotion it generates. Valiant Hearts, of course, I sobbed like a baby at the end of that. World War I game that I thought was actually more successful at what it tried to do than This War of Mine, because it didn't hammer home things. It's kind of, there's, you get to play 3 different characters. They look kind of goofy. It's a side scroller. You get to play a dog at one point who survives, and it's but by the end you care so much, and it's not all of, World War I was a horrible thing, and it's not all sunshine and magic. So that one, Prune, as I said, Never Alone, which is the Eskimo girl and her wolf. Brothers, where you have to make a really big decision in the game. Oh, I also didn't put on here. What's the game where you've come back from college and the family's all gone?
Gone Home.
Gone Home. It starts out as is this a horror game? Is it a mystery? Whatever it is, and it ends up being something totally different. And again, I'm not going to spoil it.
Very, very narrative. Yeah.
Yeah, but the delivery system is kind of clunky because basically, for some reason, scattered all over the house, you find recordings and letters and all sorts of stuff, and you kind of go, BioShock used to do it that way, and it annoyed me then. So, but the actual story is done very well.
That sounds great. And before we let you go, Professor Sheldon, is there any final piece of advice you want to leave us with? There's been a lot, so it's perfectly understandable.
I would say, go back to what I said before. Start small, give XP for attendance, and grade by attrition, which is the same idea. So they're always just adding on XP. They're never they don't look at, I got a B on this, they got a B minus on this. They're always just adding, and they know what the levels they have to get to. Very simple to do. And don't get stuck with extrinsic rewards, which I'm sure a number of people, including Matt, said. Get beyond them as soon as you can. You can start there, but be careful of the systems, the computer systems you can buy that have quests and all this other stuff in them. I recommend doing it yourself. The nice thing is that if you do it yourself, you don't even need a computer.
Yeah, that's true.
My delivery system is usually PowerPoint, but you could do a multiplayer classroom in a field, and that's, I think, one of the things that I enjoy about it the most.
I really like to remind people in the podcast that it can always be heavy reliant on technology. It can be, but it doesn't have to.
No.
And that example is beautiful. I mean, having the whole game run through a PowerPoint presentation, which is something that typically people start saying, forget PowerPoint, this is terrible. No, you can do great things as well with PowerPoint, and this is a great example.
That in Indiana Jones class, I do all my classes through PowerPoints.
There you go.
Why not?
There you go. So there's a lot of inspiration to draw from that. So finally, Professor Sheldon, Plug Zone, I know we've mentioned your books several times, but if you want, you can, explain them a bit further, a couple of minutes if you want, where we can find you if there's anywhere in the world of the internet to, make any further questions and so on. And then, of course, we'll say it's game over. Okay. So you can reach me at CL Sheldon, CLSHELDON at WPI.edu. The multiplayer classroom designing coursework as a game would be the book to start with. The game plans cover it's really how far you can go. They teach physical fitness, Mandarin, cybersecurity I mentioned, and one class that was entirely online teaching culture and identity on the internet. That I have to say this. I had two of because it's all online. None of the students met each other. So I had two students who were actually plants. They were there to drive discussion. They were on two different sides of a philosophical issue that ran through this entire game, and then they turned out to be fakes. And one turned out to be a bad guy, and the other one turned out to be a good heroine. And they functioned in the class without the class knowing as helping the class keep moving. And that worked really well. And we were really afraid that people were going to get up in arms about it, but they really liked it, the students. And it's now played multiple times, and we haven't had anybody say, "What?" And I went, "Oh, my God." I was arguing with a plant.
Oh, I'm sorry. A plant is a someone who is put into the game but isn't who you think they are. Okay, so in other words, there's two humans. But one is a bad guy, and one is, actually, I think in that one worked for the FBI too.
Yeah.
So,
so they were planted there in that.
They were planted, but that's kind of a risky thing to do. But I was very happy with how that turned out. Just like blowing up the nuclear power plant didn't worry anybody either. So okay.
So very, very exciting things going on. Lots to explore after this episode, Engagers. So anything you want to look at, you have all that. You'll find it as well in the show notes. You go to professorgame.com, you type Lee Sheldon or just Sheldon, and you'll find the show notes to this episode. But for now and for today, it is time to say that it's game over.
Well, that's too bad. I thought this game touched my heart and my mind a bit. Thank you.
Hey, Engagers. Thank you for listening to Professor Game Podcast. And if you want more interviews with incredible guests like Professor Lee Sheldon, then go to professorgame.com/subscribe and get started on our email list. That way, we can be in contact and you will be the first to know of any opportunities that Professor Game might have for you. And by the way, talking about opportunities, are you going to Gamification Europe in Berlin? There's still tickets available, and you can get a very nice discount if you go to professorgame.com/gamification Europe. You'll go there, you can get a discount, and we will get to meet in person if we haven't already. And before you go to your next mission, would you like to know what the next episode of Professor Game is all about? Then you'll have to subscribe using your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there!